The water rose so fast that Clara Pemberton barely had time to grab her mother's silver locket before climbing through the window onto the pitched roof of her boarding house, watching in horror as the swollen Sacramento River swallowed Grass Valley whole in the spring of 1862. She had heard the warnings 2 days prior, when the unseasonably warm weather began melting the Sierra Nevada snowpack at an alarming rate. But like many residents of the California gold mining town, Clara had dismissed the concerns. Grass Valley sat in the foothills, after all, and flooding seemed an impossible threat for a community perched above the valley floor. Yet here she was, clinging to the wet shingles as the muddy water churned below, carrying away barrels, furniture, and the dreams of everyone who had come west seeking fortune. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Clara's arms ached from holding herself steady on the sloped roof, her cotton dress soaked through and heavy against her skin. She was 22 years old, had traveled from Boston 2 years earlier to start fresh after her father's death, and now it seemed the frontier would claim her just as surely as consumption had claimed him. The water lapped at the edge of the roof, rising inch by terrifying inch. In the distance, she could hear screams and the splintering of wood as buildings surrendered to the flood. Through the sheets of rain, Clara spotted movement on the water. At first, she thought it might be debris, but then she saw the deliberate motion of oars cutting through the current. A small wooden boat emerged from the gray haze, navigated by a single figure who seemed impossibly steady, despite the violent water. As the vessel drew closer, she could make out a man in his mid-20s, his dark hat pulled low against the rain, rowing with powerful, measured strokes that spoke of years working with his hands. "Hold on," he called out, his voice cutting through the storm. "I'm coming to you." Clara wanted to respond, but her throat was tight with fear and cold. She watched as he fought the current, steering the boat with remarkable skill toward her building. The water tried to pull him sideways, to dash him against the remains of the general store, but he anticipated every shift and adjusted accordingly. When he was close enough, she could see his face clearly, sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes that held a fierce determination. "Can you move to the edge?" he shouted. Clara nodded, though the thought of shifting her position terrified her. The shingles were slick, and one wrong move would send her sliding into the torrent below. Still, she trusted something in his voice, in the confidence of his movements. Carefully, she began to inch her way down the slope of the roof toward the edge where he maneuvered the boat. "That's it," he encouraged, keeping the boat steady with one oar while reaching out with his free hand. "Just a little further. I've got you." The boat rocked dangerously close to the building, and Clara could see the muscles in his arms straining to hold position against the current. This was her only chance. She took a breath and pushed herself forward, her hands stretching toward his. Their fingers connected, and his grip closed around her wrist like iron. "I've got you," he said again, and there was something in those words that made her believe him completely. With surprising gentleness, despite his obvious strength, he lifted her from the roof and guided her down into the boat. Her legs nearly gave out when she tried to stand, and he caught her around the waist, steadying her until she could collapse onto the wooden seat. "Stay low," he instructed, already turning his attention back to rowing. "We need to get to higher ground before this gets worse." Clara pulled her wet hair from her face and watched him work. His movements were economical, wasting no energy, yet each stroke propelled them forward with purpose. He was tall, she realized now, with broad shoulders beneath his oilskin coat. His hands on the oars were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who knew hard labor. "Thank you," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "You saved my life." He glanced at her briefly, and she saw something flicker in his expression, perhaps surprise that she could still speak, or maybe just acknowledgement. "Not safe yet," he replied, "but we will be." They moved through what had once been Main Street, past buildings Clara had walked by every day for 2 years. The millinery where she had purchased her Sunday hat now had water pouring through its broken windows. The saloon where miners spent their gold dust was half collapsed, its piano floating absurdly in the current. She tried not to think about the people who might still be trapped inside these structures, tried not to imagine their fates. "Is there anyone else in your building?" the man asked, as if reading her thoughts. "No," Clara said. "Mrs. Henderson, who runs the boarding house, left yesterday to stay with her sister in Nevada City. The other boarders had already gone. I stayed because—" She trailed off, unsure how to explain that she had nowhere else to go, that Grass Valley was the only home she had left in this world. He nodded, not pressing for more. They continued in silence, broken only by the rain and the splash of oars. The man steered them away from the main flow of the flood, finding calmer channels between buildings. Clara noticed he knew exactly where he was going, never hesitating at intersections she could barely recognize beneath the water. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly, needing to know who had risked his life to save hers. "Warren Kincaid," he answered, pulling hard on the left oar to avoid a floating wagon wheel. "I've got a ranch about 3 miles north of town, up on the ridge. Been bringing people up there since yesterday when the water started rising." "Clara Pemberton," she offered in return. "I work at the assayer's office, or I did before all this." Warren glanced at her again, and this time his expression held something that might have been approval. "Assayer's clerk. That's good work. Takes a sharp mind." The compliment warmed her more than it should have, given their circumstances. Most men she encountered in Grass Valley either dismissed her capabilities or made improper advances. Warren Kincaid did neither. He treated her rescue as a matter of course, as if pulling women from rooftops was simply what one did when the river decided to reclaim the valley. As they moved further from the center of town, the water began to shallow slightly, and Clara could see the tops of fence posts emerging from the flood. The rain was finally lessening, reducing from a deluge to a steady drizzle. In the distance, she spotted dry land rising above the waterline, a ridge covered in ponderosa pines and live oaks, somehow untouched by the disaster below. "That's where we're headed," Warren said, nodding toward the ridge. "My ranch. I've got about 15 people up there already. We'll have shelter and food until this water recedes." "How did you know it would flood so badly?" Clara asked. "Everyone said it couldn't happen here." Warren's jaw tightened. "Grew up in the Sacramento Valley down on the flats. Saw what the river could do when I was a boy in '49. The way the weather's been this year, with all that snow up in the mountains and then this warm rain melting it all at once, I knew. Tried to warn folks in town, but most didn't want to hear it." There was no pride in his voice, no satisfaction at being right. Only a weariness that suggested he had learned early that people rarely listened to warnings about disasters they could not yet see. Clara felt a pang of guilt, remembering how she had dismissed the concerns of her landlady, insisting she would be fine for one more night. The boat scraped against something solid, and Warren shipped the oars to peer over the side. "Ground's rising here. We can pull the boat in and walk the rest of the way." He stood carefully, the boat rocking beneath his weight, and stepped out into water that came to his knees. Then he reached back for Clara. This time, when his hands closed around her waist to lift her out, she felt the strength in them, the sureness. He set her down gently, keeping one hand on her elbow to steady her as she found her footing. The walk up the ridge was difficult. Clara's skirts were waterlogged and heavy, catching on bushes and rocks. Her shoes squelched with every step and her legs trembled with exhaustion. Warren stayed close beside her, his hand hovering near her back, ready to catch her if she stumbled. When they reached a particularly steep section, he simply took her hand without asking and pulled her up after him. At the top of the ridge, Clara saw what Warren had meant by shelter. His ranch was modest but sturdy, a main house built from rough-hewn timber, a barn that looked newer than the house, and several outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the windows, Clara could see the glow of lamplight. It looked like safety. It looked like home. The front door opened before they reached it, and a gray-haired woman with a kind face emerged. "Warren, thank God you're back. We were getting worried." Her eyes shifted to Clara and her expression softened. "Oh, you poor dear. Come inside quickly. Let's get you warm and dry." The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, Warren's neighbor from the next ranch over, ushered Clara into the main room where several other flood refugees sat huddled near the fireplace. There were two families with small children, an elderly couple, and three young men who looked like minors. They all wore the same expression of shocked survival, grateful to be alive but uncertain what came next. Martha led Clara to a back room and produced a bundle of dry clothes. "These belonged to Warren's mother," she explained. "She passed 3 years ago. God rest her. You're about her size, I think. Change into these and come back out by the fire. I'll make you some tea." The clothes fit reasonably well, a simple cotton dress in faded blue, thick stockings, and a wool shawl. Clara's hands shook as she buttoned the dress, the reality of what had just happened finally settling over her. She could have died on that roof, would have died if not for Warren Kincaid's courage and skill. The thought made her knees weak, and she sat down hard on the edge of the bed, pressing her hands to her face. A soft knock came at the door. "Miss Pemberton, are you all right?" It was Warren's voice, concerned but respectful of her privacy. Clara took a breath and stood. "Yes, I'm fine. Just needed a moment." When she emerged, Warren had changed into dry clothes as well, work pants and a flannel shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark hair was wet and pushed back from his face, revealing strong features that would have been handsome if not for the worry lines creasing his forehead. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression eased. "The tea's ready," he said, "and Martha's heating up some stew. You should eat." Clara accepted the cup of tea gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. The stew, when it came, was simple but hearty: beef and potatoes and carrots that tasted better than any meal she could remember. Around her, the other refugees were eating with similar appreciation, their conversations quiet and subdued. As night fell, the reality of their situation became clear. They were safe for now, but everything below the ridge was underwater. Homes, businesses, livelihoods, all of it lost or damaged beyond immediate repair. The children had fallen asleep on blankets near the fire, and their parents sat watching them with hollow eyes that reflected the firelight. Warren moved among his unexpected guests with quiet efficiency, making sure everyone had what they needed, answering questions honestly even when the answers were not reassuring. Clara watched him and felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of character, of the kind of man who did not hesitate when others needed help. When he finally sat down, choosing a spot near where Clara perched on a wooden chair, she said quietly, "You've done this before. Taken care of people, I mean." Warren looked into the fire for a long moment before answering. "My father died when I was 16, left me with this ranch and my mother to care for. Learned quick that sometimes you just do what needs doing, whether you feel ready or not. Your mother was lucky to have you." "I was lucky to have her," he corrected. She taught me everything worth knowing about running a ranch, about being decent to people. Worked herself too hard, though. Her heart gave out 3 years back." Clara heard the grief in his voice, still fresh despite the time that had passed. She understood that kind of loss, the way it hollowed you out and reshaped you into something different than you had been before. "I lost my father 2 years ago," she offered. "That's why I came west. Couldn't stay in Boston with all those memories." Warren turned to look at her fully then, and Clara saw understanding in his eyes. Not pity, but genuine comprehension of what it meant to carry that kind of loss. "And now you've lost everything again," he said softly. "No," Clara replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'm alive. That's not nothing." Something in Warren's expression changed, a softening around his eyes, a slight curve to his mouth that was not quite a smile but close. "No," he agreed, "that's not nothing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Around them, the other refugees began to settle for the night, arranging themselves on blankets and bedrolls that Warren and Martha had provided. The storm outside had finally broken, and through the window, Clara could see stars beginning to emerge between the clouds. "You should rest," Warren said eventually. "Tomorrow we'll need to start figuring out what can be salvaged, what needs to be rebuilt." Clara nodded, but she found herself reluctant to move from this spot, from the quiet companionship of sitting beside someone who understood loss and survival. "Thank you," she said again. "Not just for saving me, but for all of this. Taking in strangers, sharing what you have." Not everyone would do that. Warren stood and extended his hand to help her up. When she placed her hand in his, she felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "My mother used to say that we're all strangers until we're not," he said. "And that kindness is just good sense dressed up in fancy words." Clara smiled at that, a real smile that felt strange on her face after the terror of the day. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She had her moments," Warren agreed. He released her hand, but slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. "Good night, Miss Pemberton. Sleep well, Clara," she said. "Please call me Clara, Clara," he repeated, and the way he said her name made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Good night, Clara." She settled onto a blanket near the other women, pulling the wool shawl tight around her shoulders. Despite the hardness of the floor and the strangeness of her surroundings, Clara fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the day's ordeal. Her dreams were filled with rushing water and strong hands lifting her to safety, with dark eyes that held both sorrow and strength. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and the sound of children's voices raised in play. For a moment, she forgot where she was and why, but then memory came flooding back and she sat up quickly, looking around. Warren was already outside. She could see him through the window conferring with several of the men. Martha was at the stove, cooking breakfast for the small crowd of refugees. The elderly woman from the night before was helping, moving stiffly but with purpose. Life, Clara realized, was reasserting itself even in the wake of disaster. She rose and helped Martha serve the breakfast, distributing plates and cups to grateful recipients. The children ate with enthusiasm, their resilience already apparent in their laughter and energy. Their parents looked less certain, worry etched deep in their faces as they contemplated their losses. After breakfast, Warren addressed the group. "I'm going to ride down to see how high the water still is," he announced. "Any man who wants to come is welcome. We'll assess the damage and start making plans." 3 of the miners volunteered immediately, and one of the fathers from the families joined them. Warren's gaze found Clara across the room. "We'll be back by midday," he told her, though his words seemed to encompass everyone. "Stay put and stay safe. If you need anything, Martha knows where everything is." Clara nodded, feeling an unexpected reluctance to watch him go, which was absurd. She had known this man for less than a day. Yet she found herself standing at the window long after the men had ridden away, watching the trail that led down from the ridge. "He's a good man, our Warren," Martha said, coming to stand beside her. "Strong and steady, the kind you can depend on when things get hard. You've known him long?" Clara asked, trying to sound casual, since he was a boy. "His father and my husband were friends, worked together during the gold rush before they both decided ranching made more sense than chasing dreams. Watched Warren grow up, saw him take on burdens that would have crushed a lesser man." Martha paused, then added carefully, "He's been alone too long, though. Needs someone to share that strength with, not just use it taking care of everyone else." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mrs. Martha, I couldn't possibly. I'm not suggesting anything improper," Martha interrupted gently. "Just observing. You watch him like someone seeing something they didn't know they were looking for. And I saw the way he looked at you last night when you were talking by the fire. Like maybe he found something too." Clara did not know how to respond to that, so she simply returned her attention to helping around the house. She washed dishes and swept floors, helped entertain the children, and listened to the elderly woman's stories about better times. The work was simple but grounding, reminding her that life continued even when the world turned upside down. Warren returned just before noon, as promised. Clara heard the horses before she saw them, and her heart kicked up its pace in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety. When he walked through the door, his eyes found hers immediately, as if he had been looking for her specifically. "The water's receding," he announced to the room. "Slowly, but it's going down. I'd say we've got another 3 or 4 days before it's safe to go back into town and see what's left." "And what is left?" asked one of the miners, his voice rough with worry. Warren's expression was grave. "Some buildings are still standing. The brick ones mostly, and a few of the newer structures on higher ground. But a lot of the town is damaged or gone completely. It's going to take months to rebuild, maybe longer." The news settled over the room like a weight. Clara saw despair on several faces, saw people calculating losses they could not afford. She felt it herself. The assayer's office where she worked had been in an old wooden building. The chances of it surviving were slim. Throughout the day, more survivors made their way up to Warren's ranch. He turned no one away, even as his supplies stretched thinner. By evening, there were nearly 30 people crowded into his home and barn, all looking to him for guidance and reassurance. Warren bore it with quiet dignity, never complaining about the burden, never suggesting that anyone had overstayed their welcome. Clara watched him carefully, saw the tension in his shoulders and the weariness in his eyes. When the opportunity arose, she found him alone in the barn, checking on the horses and the few cattle he had managed to drive to higher ground before the flood. "You need to rest," she said from the doorway. "You've been taking care of everyone else since this started, but who's taking care of you?" Warren turned, surprise flickering across his face. "I'm fine," he said automatically. "You're exhausted," Clara countered, stepping into the barn. "I can see it. You're going to make yourself sick if you keep pushing like this." He studied her for a moment, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. "You're not the kind of woman who lets things be, are you?" "Not when I see someone suffering needlessly," Clara replied. "You saved my life, Warren Kincaid. The least I can do is make sure you don't work yourself to death in the aftermath." A slow smile spread across Warren's face, transforming his features from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "All right," he conceded. "I'll rest, but only if you promise to do the same." You've been working yourself just as hard, helping Martha and looking after the others." "Deal," Clara said, extending her hand formally. Warren took it, but instead of shaking, he held it gently. His thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture that might have been unconscious, but sent electricity racing up Clara's arm. "You're different from what I expected," he said quietly. "When I pulled you off that roof, I thought you'd be helpless, needing constant care and comfort. But you're strong, stronger than most people I know." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the compliment, at being seen so clearly by someone she barely knew. "The frontier doesn't allow for weakness," she said, her voice catching slightly. "You learn to be strong or you don't survive." "That's true," Warren agreed, "but strength can wear different faces. Yours wears kindness. That's rare." Before Clara could respond, voices called from outside, someone needing Warren's attention again. He released her hand reluctantly and headed toward the door, but he glanced back at her with an expression that made her heart flutter in her chest. Over the next few days, a routine established itself at the ranch. Warren and the able-bodied men rode down each morning to monitor the flood waters and begin salvage operations. The women kept the house running, cooking and cleaning and caring for the children. Clara found herself falling into an easy partnership with Martha, the two of them working together to stretch supplies and keep spirits up. But it was the evenings that Clara looked forward to most. After supper, when the children were settled and the work was done, she and Warren would find themselves sitting together, talking quietly while the others gradually drifted off to sleep. They spoke of their pasts, Warren's childhood in the gold fields, Clara's life in Boston. They talked about their dreams, the futures they had imagined before the flood changed everything. "I wanted to save enough to open my own assayer's office," Clara confessed one night. "Not just work for someone else, but have my own business, prove that a woman could do it just as well as any man." Warren nodded thoughtfully. "You could still do that, once things are rebuilt. Might take longer than you planned, but the dream's not dead unless you let it die." "What about you?" Clara asked. "What do you dream of?" Warren was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Used to dream of making this ranch the best in the county, building something my parents would be proud of. But lately—" He trailed off, then looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Lately, I've been dreaming of not being so alone. Of having someone to build things with, instead of always building alone." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara's pulse quickened, and she found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she could not quite name. "That sounds like a good dream," she said softly. Warren reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Clara," he began, his voice rough with emotion. But before he could continue, one of the children cried out in his sleep, and the moment shattered. Warren pulled back, clearing his throat, and they sat in charged silence until it was time to retire for the night. Clara lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, her heart racing. She barely knew Warren Kincaid, had known him for less than a week. Yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. It was more than gratitude for her rescue, more than admiration for his strength and character. It was something deeper, something that felt both thrilling and terrifying in its intensity. The next morning, Warren announced that the water had receded enough for people to begin returning to town if they wished. Several of the miners left immediately, eager to check on their claims and salvage what they could. The two families decided to stay another day, uncertain what awaited them below. Clara realized with a start that she, too, would need to leave soon. She had imposed on Warren's hospitality long enough, but the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Warren, filled her with an unexpected ache. She was helping Martha prepare lunch when Warren appeared in the doorway. "Clara, could I speak with you? Outside." Her heart jumped into her throat, but she nodded and followed him out into the bright spring sunshine. He led her away from the house, toward a small rise that overlooked the valley. From here, she could see Grass Valley below, still waterlogged but recognizable. The Sacramento River had returned to its banks, leaving behind a landscape of mud and debris. "It's going to take a long time to recover from this," Warren said, his hands shoved in his pockets. "A lot of people lost everything. Going to be hard times ahead." "Yes," Clara agreed. Unsure where he was leading, Warren turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes made her knees weak. "Clara, I know this is going to sound crazy. We've only known each other a few days. But I need to say it anyway, because if I don't, I think I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Clara's breath caught in her chest. "What is it?" "I don't want you to leave," Warren said simply. "I know you have to. I know you've got your own life and your own plans. But these past few days, having you here talking with you, watching you help everyone with such grace and kindness, it's made me realize how empty this place has been. How empty I've been." "Warren," Clara whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm not asking for anything improper," he continued quickly. "I'm not that kind of man, but I want the chance to court you properly, to see if what I'm feeling is real, if maybe you feel it too. Would you consider staying on? Martha would be a proper chaperone. You could help with the ranch work, and when things are rebuilt in town, if you still want to start your own business, I'd help you do it. I'd help you do anything you dreamed of." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. No one had ever offered her anything like this: partnership, respect, the freedom to pursue her dreams while having someone to share them with. "I feel it too," she admitted. "I thought I was losing my mind, feeling so much so fast. But yes, Warren, yes, I'd like to stay. I'd like very much to see where this leads." The smile that broke across Warren's face was like sunrise. He reached out and took both her hands in his, squeezing gently. "You've made me happier than I've been in years," he said. "I promise you won't regret this. I'll court you proper, do everything right." "I don't doubt that for a second," Clara replied, smiling through her tears. They stood there on the rise, hands clasped, looking out over the valley that had nearly killed her but had instead led her to this moment. To this man who had steered his boat through floodwaters and lifted her to safety, who had shown her what strength paired with kindness looked like. True to his word, Warren courted Clara with old-fashioned propriety over the following weeks. With Martha as chaperone, they went on long walks around the ranch, talking about everything and nothing. Warren showed Clara how the ranch operated, teaching her to ride his gentler horses and explaining the intricacies of managing cattle. Clara shared her knowledge of minerals and metals, fascinating Warren with her expertise in assaying ore samples. They discovered shared interests. Both loved reading, though books were rare enough in the frontier that they had to treasure each volume. Both believed in hard work and fair dealing. Both had learned to be self-reliant, but were discovering the joy of having someone to depend on. Warren was unfailingly respectful, never pressing for more than Clara was comfortable giving. But the attraction between them was undeniable, evident in the way their hands would brush and linger, in the long looks that passed between them, in the way Warren's voice softened when he said her name. Grass Valley slowly recovered from the flood. Buildings were repaired or rebuilt. Businesses reopened. The assayer's office where Clara had worked was too damaged to salvage, but the owner decided not to rebuild. At 23, he was ready to try his luck elsewhere. He offered to sell Clara his equipment for a fraction of its worth, and Warren immediately offered to help her set up shop. "You could work from the ranch," he suggested. At least until you've saved enough to open a proper office in town. I could build you a workspace, get everything set up proper." Clara was touched by his faith in her abilities. Most men would have expected her to abandon her ambitions now that she was being courted. But Warren seemed to understand that her dreams were part of who she was, and he wanted to support them, not stifle them. By summer, Clara had a functioning assaying operation set up in one of Warren's outbuildings. Word spread quickly that she was honest and accurate in her assessments, and miners began bringing their ore samples to her rather than making the longer trip to Nevada City. The income allowed her to contribute to the ranch's expenses, which gave her a sense of independence she valued. On a warm evening in late July, Warren asked Clara to walk with him after supper. Martha smiled knowingly and shooed them out of the house. They walked to their favorite spot on the rise, where they could watch the sun set over the valley. "Clara," Warren began, his voice nervous in a way she had never heard before, "we've been courting for 3 months now. I know that's not very long by some standards, but out here, time moves different. You know someone's character quick when you're living and working beside them every day." Clara's heart began to race. She had a feeling she knew what was coming, and the anticipation made her dizzy. Warren reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. "Nothing fancy, but it meant the world to her because my father worked a month of extra shifts to afford it. I'd be honored if you'd wear it, if you'd agree to be my wife." Clara looked at the ring, then up at Warren's face, seeing hope and fear and love mingled in his expression. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Warren's whoop of joy could probably be heard back at the house. He swept Clara into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time, a gentle, reverent kiss that promised everything and demanded nothing. "I love you," Warren whispered against her lips. "I think I started loving you the moment I saw you on that roof, so fierce and brave. But I know I love you now with everything I am." "I love you too," Clara replied. "You saved my life, but more than that, you showed me what life could be, what it should be. I want to build that life with you." They were married in September, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Grass Valley. Martha stood as witness, crying happy tears throughout the proceedings. Several of the people Warren had rescued during the flood attended, along with miners Clara had helped and neighbors from the surrounding ranches. It was a modest affair, but filled with genuine warmth and joy. The wedding night was tender and sweet, Warren taking his time to make sure Clara felt cherished and safe. They learned each other slowly, with patience and care, building intimacy that went beyond the physical. In the morning, Clara woke wrapped in her husband's arms, feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible. Life as Warren's wife was both challenging and rewarding. The ranch required constant work, and Clara threw herself into it alongside her husband. She continued her assaying business, which grew steadily as her reputation spread. Warren expanded the cattle operation, buying several new head and improving the grazing land. Together, they built something neither could have achieved alone. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with heavy snows that isolated them for weeks at a time. But Clara found she did not mind the isolation. Sitting by the fire with Warren, reading aloud to each other or simply talking, felt like the greatest luxury. They learned each other's moods and rhythms, figured out how to argue fairly and forgive quickly, discovered the deep satisfaction of partnership. In the spring of 1863, Clara realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy at the thought of a child, fear of the dangers of childbirth on the frontier, excitement about giving Warren the family he deserved. When she told him, he lifted her off her feet and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Warren replied, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've given me everything, Clara, everything I never knew I needed. The pregnancy was not easy." Clara suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into her 5th month, and the summer heat made her swell and ache. But Warren was unfailingly attentive, taking on extra work so she could rest, fetching her whatever she needed at any hour. Martha visited often, bringing wisdom and experience from having raised 5 children of her own. In December, as snow fell softly outside, Clara went into labor. Martha attended her, along with a midwife from town. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly a full day. Warren paced outside the bedroom, wearing a path in the floorboards with his worried steps. Finally, as dawn broke on a new day, the thin wail of a baby cut through the house. Warren burst into the room to find Clara exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "A son," Martha announced proudly. "Strong and healthy, just like his father." Warren approached the bed as if in a dream, his eyes fixed on the baby. When Clara placed the infant in his arms, Warren's face transformed with wonder and love so profound it brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. I'm your papa, and I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you safe and teach you right." They named him William, after Warren's father. The baby had Warren's dark hair and Clara's nose, and from the start, he had a strong set of lungs that he was not shy about using. The early months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and constant feeding. But they were also magical, watching this tiny person grow and change, seeing pieces of themselves reflected in his features and temperament. Warren proved to be a devoted father, never complaining about interrupted sleep or the extra work that came with an infant in the house. He would walk the floors for hours with William when the baby was fussy, singing old songs in his rough but gentle voice. Clara would watch them from the bed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. As William grew into a toddler, Clara gradually returned to her assaying work. Warren built a small play area in her workspace where William could entertain himself while she worked. The boy seemed fascinated by the equipment, and Clara would catch him watching intently as she tested ore samples, his dark eyes serious beyond his years. "He's going to be smart, this one," Martha observed one day, watching William stack blocks with careful precision. "Takes after his mother." "He's got his father's determination," Clara countered. "Watch how he keeps trying even when the blocks fall. That's all Warren." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and hard work. The ranch prospered under Warren and Clara's joint management. Her assaying business became the most respected in the region. They added rooms to the house, built new outbuildings, improved the herd. William grew tall and strong, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly, trailing after his father with devoted admiration. In 1866, Clara gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Caroline. She had Clara's auburn hair and Warren's dark eyes, and from the moment she could focus her gaze, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Warren, who had been such a stern and serious man when Clara first met him, became silly and playful with his daughter, making up nonsense songs and playing endless games of peek-a-boo. "You're spoiling her," Clara would say, trying to sound stern but unable to hide her smile. "She's perfect," Warren would reply, utterly unrepentant. "She deserves to be spoiled." With 2 young children, the household was chaos more often than not, but it was joyful chaos filled with laughter and love. Clara sometimes thought back to that terrified woman clinging to a roof in a flood, and marveled at how far she had come. How much her life had changed, because Warren Kincaid had been brave enough to row out into dangerous waters. When William was 6 and Caroline 3, a traveling photographer came through Grass Valley. Warren insisted they have a family portrait made, despite Clara's protests about the expense. They dressed in their Sunday best and posed stiffly for the camera, Warren standing tall with his hand on Clara's shoulder, Clara seated with Caroline on her lap, William standing straight beside his father. When the photograph was developed and delivered, Clara stared at it in wonder. There they were, frozen in time. Warren looked distinguished and prosperous, his hard work evident in his bearing. The children looked healthy and happy. And she herself, Clara barely recognized the confident, content woman looking back at her. This was not the desperate girl who had lost everything in a flood. This was someone who had found everything instead. "What are you thinking?" Warren asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Clara replied honestly. "How one terrible day turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." Warren rested his chin on her shoulder, looking at the photograph with her. "I think about that too. About what would have happened if I'd gone a different direction that day, if I'd missed your building somehow. The thought terrifies me." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "But you didn't miss it. You found me. And you kept finding me every day since. That's the miracle, Warren, not the dramatic rescue, but everything that came after, the choosing to stay, to build, to love." Warren kissed her then, tender and deep, a kiss that still made her pulse race even after years of marriage. "I'll keep choosing you," he promised, "every day for the rest of my life." The years continued to unfold with their share of joys and sorrows. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1868, leaving a hole in their lives, but also grateful memories of her kindness and wisdom. The ranch survived droughts and harsh winters, grew and prospered through good management and hard work. Clara's assaying business became profitable enough that she was able to hire an assistant, a young man fresh from college who was eager to learn. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning as much as ranch work. Caroline was his opposite, wild and adventurous, always climbing trees or riding too fast, giving her parents constant heart attacks with her fearlessness. Clara saw herself in her daughter's independence and smiled, remembering her own determination to prove herself in a man's world. In 1870, another flood threatened Grass Valley. But this time, the town was prepared. Levees had been built, drainage improved. When the waters rose, they rose less dramatically, and the damage was minimal. Warren and Clara opened their ranch again to those who needed shelter, though far fewer required it this time. "We've learned," Warren observed, watching the controlled flood from their familiar spot on the rise. "After last time, people listened. They prepared. That's what we do. We survive, we learn, we get stronger." Clara leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders. "I'm glad I was here for both floods. The first gave me you. The second showed me what we built together, not just this ranch, but a community that looks out for each other." "Speaking of building," Warren said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "how would you feel about adding to our family again?" Clara looked up at him in surprise. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'd like more children if you're willing," Warren replied. "I love our family, Clara. I love watching you be a mother, watching our children grow. If you want to stop at 2, I understand. But if you'd consider having more, I'd be honored." Clara thought about it seriously. She was 30 now, still young enough for more children, though the risks increased with age. But she also felt the same pull Warren did, the desire to expand their family, to fill their home with more love and laughter. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, let's have more babies. Let's fill this ranch with so much love it spills over." Their third child, a son they named Walter, was born in early 1871. The labor was easier this time, and Walter was a placid, easy baby who seemed content to simply observe the chaos of his older siblings with patient interest. 2 years later, Clara gave birth to their fourth and final child, a daughter named Catherine, who had her mother's sharp mind and her father's steady temperament. With 4 children, the house was constantly noisy and busy. But Warren and Clara thrived in the chaos, working as a seamless team to manage the ranch, the business, and their growing family. William, now 10, helped his father with the cattle and showed a natural gift for animal husbandry. Caroline, 7, was learning a saying from her mother and showed surprising aptitude for the precise work. The younger 2 were still finding their ways, but they were healthy and happy, which was all their parents could ask. In 1875, on a warm spring evening much like the one when Warren had proposed, he found Clara in her workshop after the children were in bed. She was finishing up some paperwork, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Remember this time 13 years ago?" Warren asked, leaning against the doorframe. Clara looked up and smiled. "How could I forget? You proposed, changed my whole life." "Changed mine too," Warren said. He crossed the room and took her hand, pulling her to her feet. "Dance with me." "There's no music," Clara protested, laughing. "Don't need music," Warren replied. "Just need you." They swayed together in the quiet workshop, the smell of chemicals and minerals mixing with the scent of spring coming through the open window. Outside, their ranch sprawled prosperous and peaceful. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. And here in each other's arms, they were exactly where they belonged. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked softly. "Taking in that half-drowned woman from the roof, tying your life to hers." Warren pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "Clara Kincaid, you are the best decision I ever made. Every single day with you has been a gift. Every child we made, every challenge we faced, every moment of happiness and sorrow, I'd choose it all again in a heartbeat. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day, maybe more." Tears filled Clara's eyes. "I love you. I will never stop loving you." "Good," Warren said, that slow smile spreading across his face, "because I plan on keeping you around for a very long time. We've got grandchildren to spoil someday, more adventures to have. This story's far from over." He was right, of course. Their story continued to unfold in the years that followed. William married a schoolteacher from Sacramento and took over the ranch's operations, proving to be just as capable as his father. Caroline shocked everyone by going to college in San Francisco, where she studied chemistry, before returning to expand the assaying business into a proper laboratory that served mining operations throughout California. Walter became a veterinarian, staying close to home and tending to the animals his family and neighbors relied upon. Catherine married late, at 26, to a lawyer from Nevada City. She and her husband built a house on the edge of Warren and Clara's property, staying close to the family she adored. The grandchildren came, as Warren had predicted. 6 in total, spread across their 4 children's families. Warren proved to be an even softer touch as a grandfather than he had been as a father, letting the little ones get away with mischief that would have earned his own children a talking to. Clara watched him with their grandchildren and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentle giant he had always been beneath the tough exterior frontier life demanded. In 1890, As Warren and Clara approached their 50s, Grass Valley held a celebration for the survivors of the Great Flood of 1862. 28 years had passed since that terrifying spring, and the town wanted to honor those who had persevered and rebuilt. Warren and Clara attended, now among the elder statesmen of the community. The mayor gave a speech about resilience and community, about how the flood had nearly destroyed them but ultimately made them stronger. Then he called Warren to the stage to say a few words. Warren, never comfortable with public speaking, tried to decline, but Clara pushed him forward with an encouraging smile. Warren stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of familiar faces. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice gruff. "But I'll say this. The flood took a lot from us. Homes, businesses, lives. But it also gave us something. It showed us what we're made of. It brought people together who might never have met otherwise." His eyes found Clara in the crowd, and his expression softened. "I rode out that day thinking I'd save some lives, do what needed doing. Didn't expect to find the woman who'd become my whole world. Didn't expect that the worst disaster I'd seen would lead to the best thing that ever happened to me. But that's life on the frontier. You never know what's coming. You just face it with courage and hope, and trust that good people will help you through." The crowd erupted in applause, but Warren only had eyes for Clara. He stepped down from the stage and made his way to her, taking her hand in his weathered, work-worn one. "Still glad I pulled you off that roof?" he asked with a grin. "Every single day," Clara replied, standing on her toes to kiss him, not caring who was watching. They danced that night at the town celebration, moving slowly to the music of a fiddle and guitar. Around them, other couples swayed, and children ran laughing through the crowd. This was what they had built from the ashes of disaster life: community, love that endured. As the years advanced into the new century, Warren and Clara aged with grace and dignity. Their hands became gnarled with arthritis, their hair turned silver, their steps slowed. But their love never diminished. They still found reasons to laugh together every day, still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt in those early days of courtship. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1913, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held at the ranch, in the home they had built together, under the big oak tree Warren had planted the year they married. William gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "To my parents who showed all of us what love looks like, what partnership looks like, who built not just a ranch or a business but a legacy of kindness and strength. Everything good in my life I learned from watching you too. Thank you for being the example we all needed." Clara wiped away tears as Warren squeezed her hand. 50 years, he murmured, just for her. "And I'd do 50 more if I could." "We'll do as many as we're given," Clara replied, "and treasure every single one." They were given 8 more good years. In 1921, Warren developed pneumonia after a particularly cold winter. He fought it bravely, but at 77, his body could not recover. Clara sat by his bedside through the final days, holding his hand and reminiscing about their life together. "No regrets," Warren whispered, his voice weak but his eyes still bright when they looked at her. "Best life a man could ask for, best wife, best children, best everything. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for saying yes to a rough cowboy who didn't know the first thing about courting a lady." "You knew everything that mattered," Clara said through her tears. "You knew how to be kind, how to be strong, how to love with your whole heart. You taught me what it meant to build a life with someone, not just exist beside them. I wouldn't trade a single moment, Warren Kincaid. Not one." He smiled, that slow smile she had fallen in love with so many years ago. "I love you, always have, always will, in this life and whatever comes next." "I love you too," Clara whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "My hero, my partner, my heart." Warren passed peacefully that night, with Clara holding one hand and William holding the other, his family surrounding him with love. They buried him on the rise overlooking the valley, in the spot where he had proposed all those decades ago. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the life he had lived and the impact he had made. Clara grieved deeply, but she did not shatter. Warren had taught her to be strong, and she honored his memory by continuing to live fully. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, kept up with the assaying business that Catherine now ran, and took daily walks to Warren's grave to sit and talk to him about her day. 3 years later, Clara followed her husband into rest. She passed peacefully in her sleep at 83, her children discovering her in the morning with a smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in her dreams. They buried her next to Warren, their graves marked with a single large stone that read, "Warren and Clara Kincaid." He steered through the storm. She held steady. Together they built a life of love. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passing from William to his son, then to his grandson. The story of the flood and the rescue became family legend, told to each new generation as an example of courage, love, and the unexpected ways life can change in a single moment. In the 1960s, a great-great-granddaughter doing a school project went through old family papers and found a journal Clara had kept. In it, she had written an entry dated September 1863, just after her wedding. "Today I married Warren Kincaid, the man who saved my life. But I realize now that the saving didn't happen in a single moment on a rooftop. It happened in every choice he made afterward to see me as strong rather than helpless, to support my dreams rather than stifle them, to build with me rather than for me. He steered the boat through the flood, yes. But more importantly, he steered us both toward a future neither could have imagined alone. That is the real rescue. That is the real love." The great-great-granddaughter read these words and smiled, understanding in a new way the foundation upon which her family had been built. It was not just the dramatic story of a flood rescue that mattered. It was everything that came after the daily choices to love and respect and partner with each other. The quiet heroism of building a life together through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, through 50 years of steady devotion. And on the rise above Grass Valley, where 2 graves sat side by side beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak, the wind whispered through the grass, and the sun shone warm on the stone. It was peaceful there, and beautiful, and filled with the presence of a love that had transcended death itself. The end came full circle in that valley, where water had once threatened to destroy everything, where a cowboy had steered his boat through impossible currents to reach a stranded woman, where 2 souls had found each other in the midst of chaos and built something that would endure for generations. Their story was complete, every thread woven tight, every promise kept, every dream realized beyond what either had dared to hope on that rain-soaked day in 1862. Warren and Clara Kincaid left behind more than a prosperous ranch or a successful business. They left a legacy of love, the kind that inspires poetry and sustains families, that turns ordinary lives into extraordinary stories. They proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to the best, that courage and kindness can transform disaster into destiny, and that true love is not found in perfection, but in the choice to stay, to build, to cherish through all the messy, difficult, beautiful reality of human existence. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried that legacy forward, each generation adding their own chapters while honoring the foundation Warren and Clara had laid. The ranch still stood, though much expanded and modernized. The assaying business had evolved into an environmental testing laboratory. But the spirit of those early days remained the willingness to help neighbors, the determination to build something lasting, the understanding that true wealth is measured in relationships rather than gold. And sometimes, on spring evenings when the snowmelt swells the Sacramento River and rain falls soft on the valley, people swear they can see two figures standing on the rise. A tall man with strong shoulders and kind eyes, a woman with auburn hair and a confident stance. They stand hand in hand, looking out over the valley they helped build, and the love between them is so tangible it seems to light the twilight air. It is just a story, of course. A romantic fancy told on flood anniversaries and at family gatherings. But those who tell it always smile, always feel a warmth in their hearts because they know the truth beneath the legend. Warren and Clara Kincaid existed. They loved truly and built well. And their story, beginning with a desperate rescue and ending with a legacy that spanned more than a century, proved that sometimes the fairy tales are real. Sometimes the cowboy does rescue the maiden, and sometimes, most beautifully of all, they rescue each other.